This new version of The Exorcist begins with two new shots. One shows the exterior of the McNeil house, the house that Chris McNeil has rented in Georgetown while she's making a film there. And she and her daughter have rented this house. It's a beautiful Federalist house at the corner of 36th and Prospect in Georgetown. And then that dissolves into a shot of the Virgin in Dahlgren Chapel on the Georgetown campus. So the juxtaposition of these two shots shows that these are the two places that will come under attack by the demon: the house and the church, the people within the house, the people within the church. The Exorcist opens in Mosul, Iraq, and we actually filmed in Mosul, Iraq in 1972, early 1973. It would often be 130 degrees by 10:30 in the morning, and we'd have to stop shooting and then go into our tents until 7 o'clock at night, when we then had 4 more hours of good daylight in which we could film. And the opening in Iraq, it really sets up the idea of the mythology behind the film. The idea that introduces Father Merrin, who is a Jesuit priest, but he's also an archaeologist. And he's had experience with the demon in the past. He is an exorcist. The opening has been questioned by a great many people because they're not sure exactly what it means or why it's in the film, because it's so different from everything else in the film. But I'll tell you why it's in the film. We introduce the idea that out of this ancient land, a priest archaeologist gets a premonition from certain artifacts that he finds in the ground, and later walks out to where the statue of the demon Pazuzu is in this particular dig, and he gets the realization that he will have to face the demon once again. Now, this is an actual dig in a place called Hatra, which was sacked by the Sasanians in, I believe, 37 BC. It was a town of 100,000 people, and the Sasanians attacked this town and killed all of the people, cut off their heads. They even cut off the heads of the statues. And this particular archaeological dig that we filmed is an actual dig where they were coming up with the heads of the statues that were being found that had been cut off. It was very rare to be given permission to film in Iraq, let alone to film on an archaeological dig. Iraq at that time was not run by Saddam Hussein, but it was governed by the Ba'athist Party, which is Saddam Hussein's party. They allowed us to come over here and film on the condition that I would use Iraqi people on the crew and train them in film techniques, and strangely, that we would show them how to make film blood, which we did. We showed them how you make up blood. And those were the only two conditions that they had. I had to go over with an all-British crew because at the time, America did not have diplomatic relations with Iraq, as we do not now. So I was there with a British crew without protection of the American government, or indeed really any government. We were the guests of the Ba'athist Party, and I must say, I actually loved the people of Iraq. I thought they were an absolutely wonderful people with just a very difficult leadership that did not represent the people at all. In this scene that you're looking at now, which was filmed at a chaikhana, which means tea house, you see Father Merrin. We introduce Father Merrin as a character who is an archaeologist, but you begin to learn certain other things about him. For example, those pills that he takes are nitroglycerin pills, which you take whenever you have a heart problem. The nitroglycerin literally enters your bloodstream and explodes open the arteries that have become clogged, and it's kind of a temporary solution to a heart attack. So we introduce Father Marin as a very vulnerable man who has a heart condition, but he's a very spiritual man. He's an archaeologist, as I've said, as well as a priest. And at this point, the pounding of the hammers of the blacksmiths and the overall sound of the chaikana, which is in a very noisy place. It's, by the way, directly across from the actual tomb of King Nebuchadnezzar, which is built on top of the tomb of the prophet David, and is right where we were filming there. It's right alongside the walls of Nineveh, and the walls of Nineveh still exist. They're in ruin now, but there's still traces of the ancient walls there, and those of you who remember from the Bible that it was Joshua who fought the Battle of Nineveh and brought the walls down. How he did that is a matter of speculation. Supposedly, he had his soldiers use these gigantic horns which conveyed a very loud sound, and in some way it was the sound of these horns that caused the walls to crumble. In any case, it's part of biblical myth. This is the museum in Mosul, Iraq, which is up in the north, which is now where the Iraqi missiles are being made and stored. And this is the museum in Mosul. Father Marin is bidding goodbye to the museum curator, possibly for the last time, because he now has a premonition that he's going to have to go off and fight evil once again. And as he walks off, it's the hour of prayer. I think there's 6 times a day when Muslims have to stop whatever they're doing and just pray. And he walks past that prayer group and into a place where you have all these underground shoemakers. And he walks through this long passage on his way to another ruin, as you'll see, where he is drawn to confront once again the statue of the demon Pazuzu, to confirm his premonitions. Mosul is a very old city. It's where Muslim cloth was first invented and made, still is. These buildings go back to biblical times. As Marin walks through the streets, he's almost run over by a passing coach that has an old woman in it. And that old woman who's in that shot was actually 109 years old. And we had to do that take about 6 times, so she was pretty shook up by the time we got to the take we finally used there. And he's now back out to the site of the dig, which is guarded by Iraqi guards, but they know who he is. And he goes out among the ancient stones to confront an ancient enemy. It's at this point that he becomes aware of the presence of the demon Pazuzu, which he has had to face down in the past with prior exorcisms that he's performed. He takes a walk up onto this promontory wherein you have the ancient confrontation of good versus evil. Father Marin representing the forces of goodness, the demon Pazuzu who has unleashed the dogs of war and chaos, and Pazuzu faces his old enemy. This is an actual demon, by the way. Pazuzu faces Father Marin in a symbolic face-off between good and evil, at which point the day ends and the film dissolves to present-day Georgetown. And that's the university on the left, and as the camera begins to move in, it moves into the house that you saw at the very beginning of the film, at the corner of 36th and Prospect, next to a long flight of stairs on the right there, and into the house that's being rented by Chris MacNeil, played by Ellen Burstyn, who's working on a script for the movie within the movie that she's filming. And she hears some noises from out in the hall somewhere. It makes her restless, and she decides to go out and see what these noises could be. Her bedroom is directly opposite one that she's sharing with her daughter, Reagan. And she wants to be sure, of course, that Reagan isn't bothered by these noises, which seem to be coming from the attic up there. And it sounds like rats scurrying around. And so Chris goes into her daughter's bedroom and sees that her daughter is sleeping peacefully, but that the window's open. Chris raises her daughter by herself. She and her husband are estranged, as you find out later in the film. And it's possibly this estrangement between the mother and father that works on the psychology of little Reagan. She's probably submerged the idea of her mother and father's separation, which becomes a point later in the film that leads to her eventual breakdown. But in this scene, Chris has her housekeeper with her, Willie, and Willie's husband, Carl, and they're the couple that work with Chris and travel with her on the road. This, of course, is a rented house that they're staying in now. They live in Los Angeles. Chris tells Carl that they're rats, and Carl says he'll take care of it. He'll go out and get some traps now. Of course, it's too early to buy traps. All of this early setup is the fact that it's juxtaposed with Iraq is to tie together the spirit of the demon that exists, that we first discover in Iraq, that eventually becomes the demon that possesses Reagan, who is staying in Georgetown. You're now seeing the film within the film, and the character who's talking to Chris is Burke Dennings. He's an English director played by Jack McGowan, a great Irish actor who was the first actor to play in a lot of Samuel Beckett's plays. We introduce Father Karras in that shot, who is played by Jason Miller, who is a priest on the Georgetown campus. And he's watching as Chris films a campus riot scene under the direction of Burke Dennings. Chris doesn't think much of this film that she's doing. She's just doing it for money. And it's a scene involving student riots that took place in the 1960s and early 70s. And Chris plays a teacher who is trying to get the students to listen to some reason and realize that you can't accomplish anything unless you do it within the system. And that's what she's trying to tell them right now. You can't accomplish anything unless you do it within the system. And that line is heard by Father Karras, and it becomes a very prophetic line, because Father Karras will later have to try to assist and then finally become the exorcist and accomplish what he's trying to do within the Catholic faith, which is to drive out a demon. As the day ends, Chris decides that she's going to walk home from the Georgetown campus, which was only a matter of about a 5-minute walk to her rented house. So she tells her driver she's going to walk. He'll take her bag home for her, and she waves goodbye to the crew and sets off on a little idyllic walk through the streets of Georgetown during the fall season, where it's absolutely beautiful and peaceful and idyllic. And this is just a little idyllic moment that takes place at the beginning of the film. There'll be very few such moments later in the film, but this is to show you that within this world that is going to become so chaotic, the world itself is peaceful and almost idyllic. And Chris overhears a conversation between Father Karras and a priest on campus where he's counseling the priest. She overheard some of his words. The rest of his words were drowned out by an airplane, but she was interested in those words. When she comes home, she sees her secretary, Sharon, who's played by Kitty Wynn. Sharon gives her an invitation to the White House, showing that Chris has become kind of a celebrity in Washington, D.C. social life. There's young Reagan, who is now awake and has had a day of school, and she's telling her mom about school and about having taken a walk with Sharon, and they saw a horse, a beautiful horse, and she's asking her mother for a horse, and they have a wonderful, loving relationship. Reagan is smarter than her years, very much in love with life and in tune with life, a good student, a good daughter, except at this particular moment where when her mother tells her, no, you can't have a horse, Reagan decides to steal a couple of cookies from the cookie jar.
When can I have? We'll see.
Not many people have seen those cookies come out of that jar, so I have to tell you what that is. And her mother chases her because Reagan's supposed to be on a diet and not eat bad food, and they have a little tussle here, which sort of presages what's going to come later in the film when they have another physical altercation that is a lot more disturbing. Every time you see Father Karras, you'll notice that he's rising up. He's coming up. At this point, you see him coming up a flight of stairs into a subway station. And I tried to use the motif of Karras rising throughout the film because my idea is that at the very end of the film, after he's dead, his spirit also rises. So in the making of the film, I use the notion of the rising up whenever you see Karras. And in that subway, he had just a chance encounter with a homeless man who asks him for money. Karras doesn't give him anything and is disturbed by the nature of that man, who seems typical of human nature, which Karras is very much at odds with at this point in his life, because as you'll later learn, Father Karras is undergoing a spiritual crisis. He's losing his faith in God because he sees all of this plethora of homeless people, humanity suffering. He's very conscious of it, and he's beginning to wonder why. Why this suffering if there is a God? He comes home to his mother's apartment on the west side of New York, and he looks over some of the relics and mementos of his past as a boy growing up in this apartment. He was a young boxer. You see a picture of a girl who was probably his girlfriend till he gave up everything for the priesthood, except the love for his mother, and he continues to come and visit her, and she is a Greek immigrant woman, living alone, very much in pain, without anybody. She has a brother who visits her every once in a while. But you have established here the love between the mother and the son, and how much Karras cares about his mother and takes care of her and comes to see her whenever he can. She has the radio on in the apartment at all times, and it's not very well tuned. Really, her whole life now is the radio and a visit from her son. She's not well. She's probably a few days away from having to be hospitalized. But she's not the type of woman that would ever go and see a doctor. Her son ministers to her whenever he can. But what's really going on in this scene is that Karis's mother can see that he is disturbed. There's something bothering him. She knows it as only a mother can know her own son's mind. She knows it as well as he knows what's going on in his mind. And at this moment in the film, she says to him, "There's something bothering you." And what's bothering him, of course, is his crisis of faith. And he can't speak about it, so he says, "Nothing, Mom, it's nothing." But his mother knows better. At the end of the day, Father Karras leaves his mother sleeping to get back on a subway and then a train back to the Georgetown campus, and he tunes his mother's radio so there'll be Greek music playing while she's sleeping there. And now we start cross-cutting the stories of the people who are going to be intricately involved with one another throughout the course of the film.
Here?
Reagan has just made a little clay figure that she's painted of some kind of a strange object that will echo in many ways the demon Pazuzu. And her mother finds a Ouija board that Reagan had been playing with, and Mother's a little concerned what Reagan's doing with it and where she got it. And this is the first manifestation, really, outside of the noises that you've heard in the attic at their house. But this scene represents the first manifestation that Reagan is in touch with some sort of spiritual element. Namely, it's the demon Pazuzu who's begun to appear to her, but under the guise of a clown figure that she calls Captain Howdy. And she says that it's Captain Howdy who taught her how to play with the Ouija board. And she asks the Ouija board if her mom is pretty, just a silly question to show her mother how this works. And to her mother's great surprise and amazement, the little plaque moves on its own. This scene fortifies the love and the easiness between the mother and the daughter. You get to see Reagan in this scene as a perfectly normal, healthy, and happy little girl who is loved and cared for by her mother, and she returns that love. And so you're seeing the innocence of the person who is going to be targeted by a demon, the randomness of it, the fact that an innocent child can be possessed by a demon. And as we know, Mr. Blatty's novel upon which this film is based on a true story of a case that happened in 1949 in Silver Spring, Maryland, very near to Georgetown. And it was a 14-year-old boy who, again, like little Reagan, was innocent and for some reason was possessed. And that case became the foundation for Blatty's novel, The Exorcist.
Well, thank you very much.
At this particular moment, Reagan's asking her mother if her mother has any affection for Burke Dennings, the director of the film, because he's around all the time. But her mother tells her, no, Burke's just a friend. And the juxtaposition of ideas here is that Reagan, who doesn't see her father much anymore, is now concerned about an outsider coming in, namely Mr. Dennings. And her mother tells her that her concern is misplaced, but you're planting the idea that's going to pay off later of Reagan's antithesis to Mr. Dennings, because Mr. Dennings will, later in the film, be pushed out of Reagan's bedroom window and murdered. So there's a simple little idea that's being planted in this scene that perhaps Reagan has some animosity toward Burke Dennings and concern that he would replace her father. This is a bar near the Georgetown campus. It's called The Tombs. And in this particular scene, Father Karras is talking with his mentor, who is played by Reverend Tom Birmingham, who is an actual Jesuit priest. And Karras, for the first time, gives voice to the fact that he is indeed losing his faith. He's worried about his mother. He doesn't think he can do his job as counselor to the other priests, because Karras is both a priest and a psychiatrist on the Georgetown campus, and he counsels other priests. And he tells Father Birmingham here that he doesn't really think he can do it because of his own crisis of faith. And it's at that moment when he gives voice to it and says here, "I think I'm losing my faith, Tom." It's at that moment that the film takes on another dimension. The disturbance that's going on within young Regan is fed by the fact that her mother, who is very upset with her father because he hasn't called on Regan's birthday, starts swearing at the operator. We see that Regan hears that her mother uses obscenity, something that Regan has picked up from her mother, the casual use of obscenities. All quite innocent up here, but we don't know what's going on in the little girl's mind with the separation from her father and the fact that her mother's anger results in a stream of obscenities. And on the morning of the next day, Chris gets a call from the assistant director, her wake-up call to go out on the set for the film that they're making. And Chris gets a little surprised when she wakes up this morning.
Oh, just remind folks.
Because lying in the bed next to her, a very unusual event in their lives, is her little daughter Regan, who claims that she couldn't sleep because her bed was shaking. Now, Chris interprets that as being the noises that are coming from the attic. So she decides to go up into that attic and see what it is that's causing these disturbances in the house that may be affecting her daughter's sleep. These are very early moments in the film where we're planting the seeds of a troubled child. And the trouble seems to be something that can be dealt with by external medicine, possibly later even psychiatry. But these seeds that are planted, all of which are grounded in the reality of young Regan's life, namely the loss of her father, the potential divorce between her mother and father, her mother's use of obscenities whenever she's talking about the father, putting him down, the possibility of another man entering her mother's life, which is only a fantasy, but to a child it's real. And at this moment, when Chris goes up into the attic to see what it is that might have invaded their privacy, certainly an animal, probably a rat, but she sees if it is a rat, the rat has not visited the traps. And so this is, in a sense, Chris trying to find something that is right now invisible, which is the alien force that has entered into this little house in Georgetown. Carl tells her that he set traps, and you see there are no rats.
Carl, don't do that.
So it must be something else.
No rats.
No rats. Thanks a lot. That's terrific.
That morning, later in the morning, on the campus at Georgetown, at Dahlgren Chapel, Georgetown, of course, is a Jesuit-run university. A priest comes to change the flowers every morning that are in the chapel in front of the statues of the Holy Mother. We get a glimpse of the statue that we saw at the beginning of the film that will later become the object of desecration. And as the priest comes up to change the bouquet of flowers, in front of a statue that depicts someone holding the Holy Child, he then notices that the statue of the Holy Mother has been totally desecrated by someone. And now we're still cross-cutting between what's going on in the Georgetown campus and young Reagan, who is now, because of some of these early symptoms that you've seen, is being given a complete physical examination by a doctor in Virginia. And as she undergoes her physical, all of her readouts and everything else are going to appear to be quite normal. Her EKG, of course, we can see here that Reagan is being visited by something quite outside any kind of identifiable virus or disease. This is Dr. Klein, who is conducting the examination.
Can you feel this?
In his examination, Reagan is a little testy with him for some reason. Her mother out in the waiting room is unaware of what's going on, but on these two occasions where Dr. Klein is trying to take her temperature, she's very testy with him. As you can see now, the demonic impulse is getting deeper and deeper inside of the consciousness of Reagan, and her behavior is becoming very strange and unpredictable. But still nothing that would be outside the realm of a child. Dr. Klein comes into his office to tell Chris that Reagan is a normal little girl. He's given her a complete physical. He thinks she might need a prescription just to modify her behavior. As far as he's concerned, he's seen nothing out of the ordinary. This is an average, very well-adjusted little girl with perhaps a few quirks that he will mention during the course of the scene, one in particular. In this case, he prescribes Ritalin, which was very new then in being prescribed for troubled children. Now they're using it all the time, and it's a very questionable drug. Back then, no one responded to something like this as they do now, because we now know that Ritalin, which is supposed to modify a child's behavior, can contribute to further difficulties. This scene, by the way, was not in the original version of The Exorcist. This is one of the added scenes. And I think it's a very important addition because it indicates early on that Reagan has little problems that might have seemed too sudden in the original version of the film that didn't contain this scene. It's at this point that Dr. Klein explains to Chris that Reagan let out a stream of obscenities when he was examining her. Chris says, but Reagan doesn't use obscenities. What did she say? And when Dr. Klein tells her what Reagan said, Chris is embarrassed and a little bit disturbed, but she doesn't really become aware of the extent of the difficulties her daughter's going through, and she thinks that maybe it might be the fact that she, Chris, uses obscenities has caused her daughter to simply imitate her. And Dr. Klein underlines that idea and tells her that There's nothing you really have to worry about. Let's try not to worry.
Wait and see. So, in the meantime, try not to worry.
We cross-cut back now to Father Karras, who's with his uncle, John, who's his mother's brother, and they're at Bellevue Hospital. The mother's been admitted to a ward where they keep the mentally insane. His mother's gotten much worse since he last saw her, and she's in this terrible environment.
Miss,
Yes?
we want to see Mrs. Caras.
Do you have an appointment?
They don't have the money to pay for really decent hospital care, so they put her in a place where troubled women are kept and isolated, not knowing really what's wrong with her medically. And it's at this point that Father Karras' uncle tells him that if he had continued with his studies as a psychiatrist, instead of becoming a priest, he could have maybe provided for his mother a little better, which adds to Father Karras' notion of guilt. Karras is a guilt-ridden man as we meet him here. He's a man who is losing his faith. He's about to lose contact with his mother. He sees once again the dark side of humanity as shown by these women who have lost control of their faculties in many ways. And he sees once again an example of God's having deserted the world and deserted him in particular. And now he's about to lose his mother, and his mother makes him feel the guilt that he goes through the rest of the film with. His mother blames him for being put into this place, tries to tell her there's nothing he could have done, but at this moment they're estranged. Just as Karras has become estranged from his God. And while that's going on, and Karras is trying to get rid of his frustrations in the gym, Chris McNeil is giving a party at her house for local Georgetown people, politicians and their wives, people who work in the government, some people from the film crew. They're probably wrapping up the shooting in Georgetown, and Chris has given a farewell party and a kind of a thanks to the people she's come to know while she's been working there. Burke Dennings is getting drunk.
I beg your pardon? Never seen him before in my life. Have you?
And while the guests are all enjoying themselves, an astronaut here is telling Father Dyer, who is Father Karras' best friend on the campus, some of the details of a new space mission that he's going on. And while that's happening, Burke Dennings is getting drunker and starts to accuse Carl the butler of being a Nazi, trying to egg him on and goad him on. And Chris hears from Father Dyer that Father Karras' mother died last night. Chris was curious about Father Karras, who she'd only seen, as if you'll recall, in the crowd while they were making the film, and then in that courtyard where he was counseling another priest. Father Dyer explains that Karras is the counselor and that he's just lost his mother.
She was dead a couple of days before they found her.
At which point the bad blood between Burke Dennings and Carl begins to boil up, and Carl attacks him physically, and they start to fight, and then they're separated by Chris and Sharon and some of the other guests. Burke, of course, was just having a good time. And as the evening wanes, Chris goes up to check on little Reagan again and make sure that she's asleep and not being disturbed by the party that's going on downstairs. Reagan didn't look disturbed at first, but she hasn't been able to sleep. And as Chris and Sharon escort Burke Dennings to the door, they don't realize that this is the last time that they will ever see him alive. But he may have a premonition because he's trying to tell them something here, and he can't quite find the words, can't quite find what it is he wants to say. They don't take it seriously at the time, and there's just a few guests left. They're all singing around the piano. The astronaut is over there. Father Dyer is at the piano. Father Dyer's really a ham. He's a frustrated musician and performer, and if he hadn't been a priest, he probably would have been a second-class entertainer. He loves to perform at parties like this, and you have a very joyful, sort of drunken, end-of-a-party atmosphere that seems totally normal until the appearance of little Reagan, who's come down from her bedroom, and she tells the astronaut that he's going to die in outer space. It's as though she had this premonition or was told this evil thing about the astronaut. And of course, the people in the room, especially Chris, are shocked at this behavior. This is, again, early manifestation of demonic possession. This, in all of the classic cases, is what we're told takes place. Certain little facets of behavior that are out of the ordinary, where the child acts differently, nothing too extraordinary, but clearly an imposition of a kind of behavior that's not normal to the child. It's classic in the cases of demonic possession. And in this moment, the little girl is very concerned and conscious of something being wrong with her, and she asks her mother what's wrong with her. And her mother tells her, "It's just nerves, darling. Don't worry about it. Just keep taking your medicine." But of course, Chris herself, as you can see, is very worried about her daughter's behavior. Willie, the maid, is trying to get the urine stain out of the rug from what Reagan has done earlier, and that seems to be something that's very much under control. But now the situation becomes escalated by the fact that when Chris goes back into her daughter's room, she sees that her entire bed is shaking as though unseen hands are banging it up and down, trying to get at the little girl. Again, we cross-cut back to the Georgetown Jesuit residence, where Father Dyer comes to pay a visit to Father Karras, who is still mourning the recent death of his mother. You see that these two priests are very close friends. Dyer has stolen a bottle of Chivas Regal from the university president to get Karras drunk and to try and help him through the night. Again, you see that Karras is deeply guilt-ridden. His guilt is becoming much more profound. And with his guilt and his loss of faith, you have a man that is very nearly broken and dysfunctional at this point in the film.
What?
He's about to enter a troubled sleep, wherein I've put something into the film that you're about to see that isn't in the novel. It's Father Karras's dream. And in his dream, you will see juxtaposed certain things that we saw in Iraq,
Okay.
juxtaposed with Karras's guilt-ridden feelings about the death of his mother and the loss of his mother. There are images in this dream, such as this falling medal that you're about to see, that was discovered in the dig in Iraq by Father Merin, the evil dogs, the clock in Iraq, juxtaposed with Karras's mother, who's rising up but she doesn't see him, and he can't reach her. He's trying to call out to her in his dream, and she is calling out to him, but they can't reach each other. And there's the appearance of the demon as Karras runs to try and get his mother, who is now descending as though into hell. As the metal falls, we cross-cut back, and Regan's illness has become escalated to the point where she is almost out of control. And she's using obscenity, and she gets a shot to try and calm her down, while Karras, at the Mass the next day, the early morning Mass, also says a word of prayer for his mother who has just departed. On the left is the statue of the Holy Mother that has now been cleaned up. And at this point, we get to see that the physician is a little troubled, Dr. Klein. In his latest examination of Regan, he's determined that she has a disturbance in the chemical electrical activity of the brain, in the temporal lobe. X-rays have determined that she has some temporal lobe damage, and he attributes her recent change in behavior to that.
And usually just before a convulsion.
Chris was wondering what the shaking of the bed could possibly mean. But when you tell somebody something like that your daughter's bed was shaking, they look at you like you're crazy. And Dr. Klein is, of course, a medical man and a pragmatist. So he tells Chris that her daughter's problem was with her brain, not her bed. And so you now see that he is going to try and treat Regan using all of his skills, using the skills of the medical profession. He's going to try and isolate the particular problems of the brain, and it will probably involve, in addition to a very difficult examination of the brain, it may involve surgery. They don't know, but they believe they have the skills to find out, the medical skills, what is wrong with this little girl. And what you're about to see, the scene that many consider to be the most disturbing scene in the film, is a step-by-step actual arteriogram, wherein they are going to try and isolate the damage to the brain. And what they do is they inject a dye through the carotid artery of the little girl, a dye that goes up into the carotid artery and then up into the arteries that surround the brain so that they can see if there's any arterial damage. They're able, with this dye that goes into the arteries around the brain, they're able to determine if there's any arteries that are broken or cut off. And if they can find such a situation, they can then simply go in and operate and correct the damage. And so what you're seeing now by actual doctors from NYU Medical Center in New York is an arteriogram that for many years was used as a training film for other radiologists who were going to perform arteriograms. This is as close to an actual arteriogram as you could possibly photograph. These are the very steps that are taken. And what the doctor's doing now is preparing a hole in Regan's neck to insert a valve that will inject the dye into the carotid artery and thus up around through the arteries of the brain so that it can outline those arteries in an X-ray and they can see what is normal and what is abnormal. Of course, she has to be awake, slightly sedated but awake because they have to move her around and she has to cooperate with them. And it's very painful to her. The very idea of it is painful. And what they're doing now is hooking up to prepare to take the X-rays of the brain from a multitude of angles now that the dye has been inserted. This is one of the most disturbing soundtracks in the film as well. Over this loud sound of the X-ray machine, you can hear Reagan screaming and then total silence. And now these X-rays, seen by Dr. Klein and by an expert, Dr. Tanney here, who's an expert in brain damage. They're looking at these photographs, and what they see is a normal pattern. They don't see anything particularly wrong with Reagan's brain. And so Dr. Klein asks if Dr. Tanney will accompany him to the McNeil house to look at the child himself. They set off for the house, and at the moment when they arrive, the situation has gotten worse, and what you are about to see is the first extreme manifestation of demonic possession. And these details are from actual cases where demonic possession has occurred. And I'm just going to quiet down for a minute while you watch this. This is demonic possession, superhuman physical ability, a stream of obscenities, being slapped around and controlled by an unseen force. This is what demonic possession is like in cases that I've read and that have been described to me. Of course, it causes great hysteria among people in the household. Reagan is sedated. The doctors have watched her until she's been so sedated that she'll probably sleep through the night, they tell Chris. They look a bit sheepish here and embarrassed because they really don't have an explanation for what's gone on with the child. They have only their medical skills, and their medical skills seem to be helpless against whatever has taken control of this child. But at this point, they're not ready to give up their medicine. They suggest to Chris that she let the child undergo further testing, a pneumoencephalogram, that is even a more invasive procedure than an arteriogram in many ways, but will isolate whatever problems the child is having in what they still believe is the temporal lobe of the brain. Chris is beginning to lose faith in these doctors, but what can she do? What could any parent do at this point? You do not leap to the idea of demonic possession. Nobody does. Cases are so rare, they're as rare as what Dr. Tanney is there telling her is the rarity of cases of split personality. There are fewer than 100 actual cases of split personality, actual split personality at that time in the United States, whereas the term has been widely thrown about. There are just not that many cases of actual split personality. So Chris has no choice but to allow them to conduct a pneumoencephalogram, a further procedure that appears to be a torture chamber for her child. And lo and behold, the more detailed X-rays show nothing, no brain damage. Nothing that these doctors can pinpoint as being wrong with her child.
Keep any drugs in your house?
No.
Against his better judgment,
Are you sure?
Dr. Klein is about to suggest to Chris that the next practical step would be psychiatry.
You planning?
As you can see, he's very nervous about where he goes from here because
No.
it's almost an admission of defeat by a physician that none of his medicine can be of any help to this afflicted child. And so he suggests that Chris consult a psychiatrist.
Why'd you ask?
At this point in the film, of course, we all know that that's not going to do too much good either, and Chris doesn't have much hope as she drives home. And as she gets back and approaches her house from the lower level, she sees that there's some sort of accident at the foot of the steps next to the house, and a bunch of police cars, and at this point, she's not really aware of what that accident involves or who, because she's so lost in her own thoughts. When she comes back into the house, the phone rings, there's nobody on the other line. The lights blink on and off. There's clearly something in the house, some other presence that has now invaded this household. When Chris goes into her daughter's room, the windows are open and it's very cold, but it's unnaturally cold. It's so cold that her breath appears in the room. Outside, there are the distant sounds of the accident, but Chris doesn't think it has anything to do with her or her daughter. But her daughter's alone in this bedroom. Sharon was supposed to be there watching her while Chris was at the doctor's. But she comes home to find that her daughter is alone with the window open and nobody there. So she's very upset. She's trying to find the servants. They don't seem to be around. She's trying to find Sharon, at which point Sharon comes home and tells her that she had to go out for medicine for Reagan, and she left Burke Dennings, who had showed up at the house. She left Burke Dennings alone with little Reagan, and Burke had evidently gone up to see Reagan in her bedroom.
Shut up.
Chuck, the assistant director, comes in. He's the one that had been trying to reach Chris on the phone. But he comes in now to see if they'd heard the news, which obviously they hadn't heard, that Burke Dennings not only is dead, but fell down those steps that are right next to the house, 6 flights of steps leading to the bottom of M Street. He had somehow fallen down those steps. Probably he was drunk, they think. But this is almost too much for Chris to bear, and Sharon as well. As the premonition sets in that Reagan had something to do with it, you now see what Chris sees for the first time, and that is that her daughter is almost completely taken over by an alien force that she has no control over. The psychiatrist who's brought in uses hypnosis as part of his technique, and he's hypnotized Reagan in order to try and draw from her, under hypnosis, her idea of what it is that's troubling her. He's taking her story seriously, that there is someone who she feels has taken over her body physically, as well as her mind.
If I ask him to tell me, will you let him answer?
No.
And the psychiatrist, hypnotist, takes this very seriously and
If he talks to me,
tries to draw from Reagan some kind of specific identification of what it is that she feels is harassing her.
I'm speaking to the person inside.
At this point, she's afraid to talk about it. She's obviously been told by the demon not to talk about it yet.
Come
But
forward.
with the psychiatrist probing, the demon decides to get a little more active. And through his possession of Reagan, He manifests this foul odor that everyone in the room can sense, and then resorts to a physical attack on the psychiatrist himself. Showing almost superhuman strength, Reagan has grabbed the psychiatrist's crotch and brings him to the ground in pain and agony as we cross-cut to the track at Georgetown University where Father Karras is running in the morning. Reagan's scream has been heard over this track, again in terms of the technique of the film uniting both stories. And the camera finds Lieutenant Kinderman, played by Lee J. Cobb, the great American actor Lee J. Cobb, the Academy Award-winning actor who gives such an incredible portrayal of Lieutenant Kinderman, who is investigating the death of Burke Dennings. And Kinderman decides to introduce himself to Father Karras, who is the counselor for all of the other priests on the Georgetown campus, because he believes that Karras may be counseling a troubled priest, and that maybe the manifestations of the invasions in the church, the desecrations, and the death of Burke Dennings under unusual circumstances might in some way be related to a troubled priest. And maybe Father Karras can give him some insight as to who this might be, who it is that could be so troubled that they are out of control and causing physical and mental damage in this otherwise peaceful community.
Witchcraft. From the witching end, not the hunting.
Here again, their discussion of the evil doings that are taking place is all against a background of life. The campus is filled with life and athletic activity, healthy young bodies. And against this background, Karras is hearing the first details of how Burke Dennings died at the foot of M Street with his head turned completely around, as in a kind of witchcraft ritual.
Was found at the bottom of those steps leading to M Street with his head turned completely around, facing backwards.
Karras has never seen or heard of anything like that.
Didn't happen in the fall?
It's possible.
But it's disturbing enough for him to
Unlikely.
try to see if he can be of any help to Kinderman if he can. While Kinderman's talking here, Karras is obviously thinking about anyone that he might be treating that could possibly be doing something like this. Obviously, the desecration of the statue in the church was done by somebody who has close access to the church. And this is back in the courtyard at Georgetown, just outside Dahlgren Chapel.
But for priests on the campus here, you're the psychiatrist, you know.
And we see that the detective and the priest are becoming a little easier with each other. They kind of like each other. The way you meet somebody, and even in a difficult circumstance or under troubled times, you meet somebody in those circumstances you take a liking to. And we can see here that a friendship is developing between Lieutenant Kinderman and Father Karras that is planting the seeds for something much later in the film.
Incidentally, I mentioned it only in passing. I could always tell the judge it was a matter of confession.
Kinderman tells Karras that he loves to go see movies, that he is a movie lover, and unfortunately his wife doesn't like movies, and so he's always looking for someone to go to a movie with him because he gets passes. And we see that this is another way that the two men, especially Kinderman, who's a lonely sort of a guy, is trying to get close to someone. And he'd like to be closer to Father Karras, but there's method in his madness. He hopes by getting close to him that maybe Father Karras can give him some information that he can use about who it is that's on the campus that's causing some of this horror to occur. Karras, of course, isn't going to tell him anything at this time and just tells him a joke
You know who I think really did it?
about the Dominicans. He says the Dominicans did it. Why don't you go pick on them?
Ordered, you know that? I lied. You look like Sal Mineo.
At that time, Chris MacNeil has now taken Reagan to a clinic for full examination. And the clinic, which is called the Behringer Clinic, is obviously based on the Menninger Clinic.
Quite frankly, we really don't know much about it at all,
And
except that it
we see that little Reagan is physically getting worse. She's got cuts all over her face that are self-inflicted. And the various doctors from the various disciplines, internal and psychiatric medicine, are trying to tell Chris that they too have been unable to find anything that they could put their finger on that is physically or mentally wrong with her daughter. And it's with great reluctance that the head of the faculty here is about to approach something to Chris and state for the first time in the film what we all know is coming,
outside chance for a cure.
and introduces the idea of exorcism.
I think of it
He introduces it in an offhand manner
as I said, it's a very
and tries to sort of underplay it as though he doesn't have that much faith in it. It is a last resort, but that it has sometimes worked. It works because of the victim's belief in the power of possession. Therefore, the power of exorcism, the victim might also believe, can be a cure. He's not really recommending this. He's sort of floating it as an idea of last resort.
has worked. In fact, although not
And at this point, Chris isn't going to do anything like that. To her, exorcism is witchcraft. Chris is an agnostic. She's not a member of any particular faith.
belief in the power of exorcism.
She believes that the power of God and the soul are unknowable. She's not an atheist, but she has no specific religious beliefs. And so the idea of an exorcism, which is conducted by the Catholic Church, and only rarely, is not something that she can take seriously at this point. So she brings her daughter home from the clinic with the situation at absolutely rock bottom. There seems to be no cure for her daughter. Reagan has been heavily sedated, and she's brought home to be put back up into her bedroom. At this point, kind of a lost cause. But Kinderman, the detective, is looking around at the scene of where Dennings had fallen to his death, while Chris is trying to observe her sleeping daughter and discovers that someone has put a crucifix under the bed. And you remember I told you that Chris isn't religious, so she didn't put that crucifix there. Someone else did. As she makes that discovery, at that precise moment, Kinderman sees something at the foot of the stairs that he hadn't noticed before at the crime scene, and that is a little clay object, a little sort of toy animal figure made out of clay by a child. Chris is very disturbed by the fact that someone would put a crucifix under her daughter's bed, and she asks everyone who works in the house, Carl, the butler, Willie, the cook, and Sharon, her assistant, whether any of them have done this, and they all deny having done it. And Kinderman has decided that he will, for the first time, pay a visit to the people who live in this house that's right adjacent to that long flight of steps where Burke Dennings fell to his death.
You put it there. Yes, I didn't.
This next scene the scene between Chris MacNeil and Lieutenant Kinderman is my favorite scene in the film. It is a beautifully written scene in which Kinderman is not really going to say that he thinks that Reagan might have caused Burke Denning's death. But in his explanation of what happened and in his elimination of all other possibilities, he is telling a mother that her daughter might be the cause of the murder of the mother's friend. Chris is trying to get control of herself through this scene. It's a cat and mouse scene very much, in that they're both talking away from the point. Kinderman isn't pressing the point. He's just sort of thinking out loud about the fact that Reagan was the last person to see Burke Dennings alive in her room. But Chris has told him that Reagan has been sick. She's bedridden. She couldn't possibly have done anything like what Kinderman seems to be getting at. And the way these two actors play this scene is a source of continual pleasure to me. It's really an example, as far as I'm concerned, of the finest kind of subtle screen acting, where what they're talking about is a murder in which her daughter's the murderer. But he's not saying it. In fact, he's saying it's impossible that that could have happened. Impossible. But Chris, of course, is reading past his words, and the possibility has entered her mind's eye as well. And she knows very well what he's getting at. Without him actually saying the words, the idea has begun to dawn on her that the murder of Burke Dennings has been caused by her daughter. She's facing that, but can't face it. And she's trying to appear as confused as Kinderman is about how any of this could have happened.
It's very remote.
She asks him if he wants another cup of coffee, hoping that he's finished with her and will say, "No, thank you. That's all I have." But what he does instead is say, sure, he'd like another cup of coffee. He wants to talk a little bit more about this. And so the vice is tightening around Chris MacNeil. She's in her kitchen, which is one of the safest places in somebody's home. There's a detective there questioning her about the death of her close friend at the hands of her daughter. And Kinderman sees some of these unusual animal drawings that Reagan has made, and he sees a little clay toy, a little turtle this time, similar to the clay toy that he found at the foot of the steps.
Your daughter, she's the artist?
He asks Chris if her daughter is the artist, and she doesn't answer him. She just takes the toy instinctively, feeling that there's something he's getting at with his introduction of that piece of clay. Kinderman decides not to press the matter any further at this time. He's planted his seeds. Kinderman is a man who works very slowly, insidiously. She knows why he's there. He knows she knows it. And so this time he's going to take his leave. And he does so on a very light note to further endear himself to Chris. That's his technique, to get the people that he is going to interrogate to trust him and to like him. And so he asks Chris for her autograph because she's a movie star. He says it's for his daughter, but now he has to admit that it's for him. We don't really know if he is a fan of hers or is just working her over. He was a very unusual creation of Bill Blatty, this detective. You later saw characters like Lieutenant Columbo, who appeared on television and worked very similarly to the way Kinderman works in this film. I'd always wished that Lee Cobb had lived on and could have played this part again, because to me it's a masterful performance, and it comes just moments before in the film when the truly most horrifying moment of the picture will take place. And what you are about to see is Regan MacNeil's final descent into demonic possession, self-destruction, and destruction of all those around her. And this is what it looks like. Some of the details that I show here were told to me by the aunt of the boy in the actual case, the moving of the furniture. I don't remember that being in the novel, but it was what the 14-year-old boy who was possessed, what his aunt told me had happened in the house. And now Regan speaks in the voice of the dead Burke Dennings as we see Karras rising up again. You remember I told you how I always show him rising up, which is a metaphor that I'm using throughout the film of his ultimate rising from the dead at the end. Because the story, ladies and gentlemen, the story is very consciously a parable of Christianity.
I'm very sorry.
Christianity being an eternal struggle of goodness over evil. Chris MacNeil here has obviously made an appointment with Father Karras because she has heard that he's the psychiatrist on the campus. She's heard a lot about him. She's noticed him. His reputation precedes him. And she's called to make an appointment to ask him a very disturbing question. She first wants to find out about him. So he tells her his background, that he had studied at Harvard and Bellevue and Johns Hopkins, studied psychiatry, that the Jesuits had put him through medical school. We know, of course, that Karras is going through his own crisis of faith at this point. Chris doesn't know that. Chris has got her own troubles, her own crisis. She's at absolute rock bottom, and so is Karras, emotionally.
Priests are pretty tight.
And what they're about to enter into together is something that will either destroy them or save them, and save the child. Chris begins to ask about what a priest would do if he knew someone had committed a crime, and Karras tells her that if it's a matter of confession, he would have to protect the confidence, but he would try to get the person to admit what he has done voluntarily. And now Chris, out of the blue, asks him, how do you go about getting an exorcism? And Father Karras tells her in this scene that it's very rare. It's rarely performed. You need church approval. At this time, when we made this film, I think there were about 3 or 4 cases of demonic possession since the turn of the century in the United States that had been given any real credence by the Catholic Church. Any number of claims of demonic possession, but actual cases of demonic possession, there were only a handful at this time, and I'm sure there aren't many more since then, that the Church gives credence to and would give permission to priests to perform a ritual that is beyond even a last resort. Karras tries to explain that there would be a great deal of investigation, and the investigation is very difficult to prove possession in order to warrant exorcism. But Chris has nowhere else to go to, nowhere to turn. Karis is her last resort. She's been to doctors, she's been to physical doctors, psychiatrists. She has nowhere else to turn to but the church at this time, and she's not a Catholic. Karis is very touched, very moved by her story and by her emotions, and he agrees to go and see the girl. When he enters the house, you can feel, as can Father Karis, an aura of something sinister and disturbing, and sounds emanating from Reagan's bedroom that are unworldly. Karis is very skeptical about what he's been asked to see, but his first look at Reagan is of a child who is hooked up to intravenous machines. Her face has been completely scarred. Her appearance is dreadful. She's tied to the bed. The bedroom has become a padded cell. And Karis is trying to show Reagan that he can deal with everything that's happening with her, and that he's there to help her. He doesn't believe she's possessed at this point. He sees that she's deeply disturbed and that she's tried to scar herself, and he hears the voice of the homeless person that he met in the subway early, who asked him if he could help an old altar boy. He heard the actual voice of that homeless man coming through Reagan's mouth. Karis is also a rational man, and he thinks that maybe that was some trick of his own mind. And he tries to approach Reagan to ask her a question about his mother, who she says is in hell.
What is it?
So now Karis has seen a deeply disturbed child. She's made a number of references to his mother, a casual incident that he experienced. Very unusual and out of the ordinary things, but still, as a psychiatrist, as a rational man, even though he's a priest, he still can't give in to the idea that he is looking at someone who is possessed by a demon.
Thank you.
He's still not ready to tell Chris McNeil that he will recommend an exorcism to the church.
Nothing you could.
So you have a situation here of Chris,
I can't do it.
who is not a believer
I
of
need
church
a-
doctrine, and Karis,
Like what?
whose faith in that doctrine has been shaken, both wrestling with the idea that at least an investigation should be conducted by the church to see if possession is an alternative of last resort.
Look, your daughter doesn't say she's a demon. She says she's the devil himself. Now, if you've seen as many psychotics as I have, you'd realize that's the same thing as saying you're Napoleon Bonaparte. You asked me what I think is best for you.
Karis is trying to make the argument of a rational person, that Reagan said she's possessed by the devil himself, and that is like someone saying that they're Napoleon Bonaparte. But Chris tells him that that creature upstairs is not her daughter. It's someone else. It's something else. Her daughter is gone, and we who have shared the experience of her daughter with her, we know that that little girl is not the girl we met at the beginning of this story. Karis, as he's leaving the house, asks Chris if Reagan or she was aware that his mother had died recently, because Reagan had made reference to it when Karis was in the room with her. She said, "Your mother's in here with us, Karis. Would you like to see her?" But Chris tells Karis that they weren't aware that his mother had died. There's no way Reagan could have known that.
Why'd you ask?
Karis has a lot to think about as he leaves the McNeil house for the first time. And it's not only Karis that's thinking about what's going on in that house. There's someone else concerned about the events there as well, and that's Lieutenant Kinderman, who is parked outside watching Reagan's bedroom window and wondering what happened there. This is a new scene that we've added as well, that I cut from the original version, that I now feel is very important, because in this scene in the language laboratory at Georgetown University, Karis is hearing an early tape recording that he got from Chris, where he can hear Reagan's voice in a tape that she was making for her father long before any of these manifestations occurred. And Karis is hearing the voice of a different person, a totally innocent, untroubled child. So he's now aware that the little girl he met in that padded cell is not the little girl who made that recording to her father. Often when you hear a priest deliver Mass, they run through it so quickly that you don't get the meaning of the words. But what Karis is saying now, as though to himself, and though for the first time, are some of the most beautiful words in any language. The idea of the body and the blood of Christ as being not simply symbolic but real. "This is my body," he says to his disciples, "and this is my blood, the blood of the everlasting covenant, the mystery of faith."
All of you drink. This is the cup of my blood.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is what this movie is about. The mystery of faith. Reagan tells Karis that it's an excellent day for an exorcism. As you can see, we're constantly alternating between scenes of faith and the discovery of one's faith, and between scenes of blasphemy like this one. Karis is now trying to tape Reagan's voice to make a comparison between the voice of the little girl that he had heard and what Reagan has become now. That tape would become evidence for the church to hear, to support the idea of exorcism. But the demon's having a little fun with him here and sort of egging him on, and
You speak Latin.
as Karis records her, he's still not totally convinced that he's dealing with someone who is demonically possessed. Clearly, the child is very disturbed and self-destructive and has certain information that it would be almost impossible for her to have.
Holy water.
But Karis decides to sprinkle her in the ritual of the use of holy water. At his mention of holy water, and when it's sprinkled on her, Reagan is in pain, and something has emerged in her, and she starts speaking in tongues. She begins to speak in a different voice, and different voices, and many voices begin to come out of her at once. And they seem to be in a language that Karis is unfamiliar with, that none of us are familiar with. Out of that little girl has emerged several other personalities. And so Karis goes down to tell Reagan's mother what he thinks at this point about what he's seen. And he waits while Chris finishes a conversation with somebody, probably Reagan's father, where she is unable to tell him what's going on. We see that she's been badly bruised herself. She's trying to talk to the father, but she's unable to find the words to tell him about Reagan. She offers Father Karras a drink, which he gladly accepts.
Want a drink?
Please.
What do you drink?
Karras has to find the words now to tell Chris
Water.
that he can't really support the idea that Reagan is possessed because the water that he sprinkled on her in the bedroom upstairs
No, it's all
was
right.
just tap water. Holy water is blessed, and what he did was with tap water, and therefore that makes the idea of her reaction to it, Reagan's reaction to it, implausible,
What's happening?
No.
Well, I think
and it would not support the idea of demonic possession.
I told Reagan that was holy water. I sprinkled it on her, and she reacted very.
Chris begins to see her last option ebbing away,
Holy water's blessed.
and so she has to bring together all the courage she can muster to tell Father Karras that she knows that Reagan killed Burke Dennings.
Killed Burke Dennings.
What?
She pushed him out her window.
She killed Burke Dennings. She pushed him out her window.
Karras goes back to the language lab to get the tape he made analyzed, the tape of the strange, garbled voices. And he's told that it's not another language. It's English played backwards, so that some voices were speaking through Reagan in a way that emerged as backward language. And what he hears when he plays the tape that's now been transferred correctly, he hears words like fear the priest, let her die. He hears various demons within Reagan fighting within her, fighting to defeat her. This is a terrifying idea, that there are voices within this child arguing to let her die.
Yeah.
He's summoned to the house late at night by Sharon. She wants to show him something. What could it be that's more unusual or terrifying than what he's already seen and heard? Sharon lets him into the house quietly. Chris has been sedated and she's asleep. Reagan is asleep. But there's something unusual that has occurred on her body that Sharon has noticed and that she has to have Karras see. What she shows him is an ultimate cry for help. Karras has obviously come in contact with an otherworldly experience. And he goes to the president of the university to make a formal request to have an exorcism performed on Reagan McNeil.
I don't know. No, not really.
The president of the university is,
But I have made
as he must be, skeptical,
that it meets the conditions.
but he respects Father Karras and he listens to him because Karras is a serious man.
Yes.
But the president is not ready to let
Of a man of experience.
Karras perform the exorcism. Karras has never performed an exorcism. Few priests have.
See who's around. In the meantime, I'll call you as soon as I know.
And as Karras's mentor, Father Birmingham here tells the president of the university, Karras has undergone a spiritual crisis of his own. There might be no harm in letting him assist at an exorcism, but probably he should not be allowed to do it himself. And so Father Birmingham recommends that Father Lancaster Merrin be summoned to perform the exorcism. Father Merrin, who has performed other exorcisms, the archaeologist priest that we met in the first scene of the film in Iraq, who had the premonition that he would have to once again face the demon.
Besides, he's had experience. I didn't know that.
Merrin has returned to the United States. He's in upstate New York at a retreat when he receives a telegram. We don't see the telegram, but we know what's in it. And Merrin knows what's in it without opening it. He knows that this is the moment is at hand when he will once again have to face his lifelong enemy. And will he be able to do it this time? Is he up to it? The demon, too, knows that Merrin is coming. She has a premonition that Father Merrin is coming to do battle once again on a new battlefield with his old enemy. There's a great deal of fear and respect on both sides. And what's interesting at this point visually is that these two men in black color in a garment being sort of the symbol of evil whenever you see it on film, these two men dressed in black are the good guys. And the little innocent child is the demon now. Merrin, who has just met Father Karras, tries to be respectful to him and suggests that Karras go back and get his copy of the Roman ritual and the various surplices needed for them to wear the proper garb. And he tries to bring Karras into his confidence so that Karras himself will have confidence. The voice of the demon is heard throughout the house, and Sharon's trying to drown it out. Merrin is waiting for Karras to return from the residence, praying silently. Chris brings him a cup of coffee. This is a new scene. This was not in the original version of the film.
Thank you very much.
Merrin says when Chris asks him if he wants something in the coffee, he says, "Well, my doctors tell me not to, but thank God my will is weak." And it's just a quiet, lovely little moment that shows Merrin's humanity
Doctors say I shouldn't.
in the face of an inhuman encounter that's about to occur. Merrin instructs Father Karras on how to behave when confronted by the demon and when participating in an exorcism. And his words seem to
The demon is a liar.
echo throughout the entire household. Not that Chris MacNeil can hear his words,
To attack us.
but she's conscious of what's going on downstairs as the priests begin to robe,
Powerful.
and she knows what's going on behind that door and can only fantasize about what's about to occur.
I think it might be helpful if I gave you some background on the different personalities Reagan has manifested.
Merrin tells Karras that there is only one demon. Forget all of the manifestation of other personalities. There is only one, and that's the noonday devil. And so again, we see Karras ascending with Merrin up to a real room in a real house on a real street in which the devil has inhabited a 12-year-old girl.
Teresa.
This story is not set in Transylvania. It's not set in Salem. It's not set in the 17th century or before. It is set today, in a real room, in a real house, on a real street, in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., where a 12-year-old child has been possessed by a demon, and the two men who have come to do battle with the demon have only these objects as weapons: a bottle of holy water, a small crucifix, the Roman ritual, and their own belief. Because what they're doing is acting in the name of God. This ritual of exorcism, which still exists in the Catholic Church and is still performed, as recently as 2 weeks ago from when I've recorded this, the Pope conducted an exorcism in the Vatican. This ritual of exorcism still goes on, rare as it is. And what is it? It is simply asking, entreating, summoning the power of Jesus Christ to drive out demons. This is the last resort. This is all that's left between this innocent child and a possession that could destroy her life and the lives of others. The demon, of course, is fighting back in the only way that the demon knows, and that is with tricks and obscenities. The demon is trying to show these priests that human beings are worthless, that they're nothing but garbage, and that life has no meaning. And the demon is constantly trying to test the faith that these men have in their God and in this ritual. This ancient ritual that's being employed against the devil's bag of tricks. I've read a number of actual case histories of exorcisms, the ones that the church gives credence to, and there aren't many. But things like this that you see here are all very typical of what's been described, and often not only by the priests, but by doctors and nurses who have been in attendance at exorcisms. These are the kind of things that occur. Supernatural things, the inexplicable. A lot can be said for the idea that because the people participating in this are in such a heightened state, that a lot of what they're seeing and experiencing is in their mind's eye. I mean, which of us could ever know that? Which of us could ever know that what we are seeing is the actual infestations of a demon into the body of a human being? As Hamlet says to Horatio, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. So while these two priests, Karras having now found his faith once again, Merrin never having lost his in spite of what he's seen throughout his life in terms of human misery, these two men are coming together with all that they have within them to summon the power of Christ to do battle once again against the demon. And what the film is about, as far as I'm concerned, is the constant struggle within all of us within all of us, every day of our lives, almost on a moment-by-moment basis, the struggle of goodness and evil which is within all of us, the constant struggle that we have to keep from doing harm to others, to keep from destroying ourselves and others. The film, then, must be seen not only in terms of the reality of what's going on in that bedroom, but the idea of the struggle that exists in humanity from the beginning of time and probably forever, of goodness doing battle with evil. It is within all of us, that constant battlefield. Yes, even within an innocent child. The child is no longer in control of her body or her mind. Something else, something other, is now in control, and the only hope she has is in the power of Christ. And so I have used that phrase over and over in this sequence. The power of Christ compels you. The power of Christ compels you. The power of that phrase to do battle against evil. And Father Nicola, who is our technical advisor, who is an expert in exorcism, told us that when the priests find a phrase that is particularly disturbing to the possessed person, they repeat that phrase over and over again, no matter where it may occur in the ritual, because it seems to be effective in, at least for the moment, in overpowering the awesome power of evil. There are moments when the demon is quieted and quelled. There are moments when it seems as though the ritual is prevailing. And then out of nowhere, the demon strikes again. This is perhaps one of the most extraordinary battle scenes that anyone can witness. It's not on a battlefield, it's not ships at sea, it's not in the air. It's in a bedroom, a child's bedroom, in which evil spirits have manifested themselves. This is something that Marin has encountered before. He knows what to expect. He knows that the struggle could take days, weeks, sometimes. There are cases on record of exorcisms having lasted for weeks, where the ritual is repeated over and over again. It's something that Karis has never experienced before. And he doesn't really understand it. He doesn't know why this little girl has been so overtaken by this evil. What did this little girl do to warrant this invasion of her mind and body? He searches within himself for an answer, and in searching, he finds his faith once again, beginning to return. And it's Father Marin who tells him, during a lull when they need to rest, it's Father Marin who tells him that what the demon is trying to do is to show them that we are all animal and ugly, that human nature is worthless, and that we are all worthless creatures. That's the message of the demon. That's why an innocent child is chosen. The demon is saying that if he can take that innocent child and invade her in such a manner and turn the innocence to evil,
reject the possibility
that then evil will prevail over innocence.
Will you excuse me, Damien?
Marin leaves Karras to think about his explanation. And we see that Marin, whose health we know has been failing, is now failing further. You remember the nitroglycerin pills from Iraq that quell the heart attack. Well, Marin feels the heart attack coming back, and so again we see him taking his nitroglycerin pills at perhaps one of the most difficult periods of his life. When Karras goes back into the room, in his mind's eye he sees that the demon has conjured up an image of his mother staring at him accusingly, and he hears the voices of the ward at Bellevue where he last saw his mother before she died. And he hears the demon now suffering, now being physically attacked more than ever before. He hears the demon speaking in his mother's voice. And the question is this what he really hears, or is this his own guilt being made manifest by the demon? Is Karras hearing the voice of his mother through this little possessed girl? Or in his mind's eye has his guilt taken over in a struggle for Karras' soul? He sees that Reagan's heart is racing.
Her heart.
Marin tells him he must not pay attention to the voices that he hears. Karras can't help but be lured in, and so Marin tells him to get out of the room. Marin sees that Karras's faith is so shaken at this point that he can be of no use in the next round of this eternal struggle. He excuses Karras from the room with great love and great respect and great pity for what has happened to Father Karras and for the awesome power of the demon. And so Marin prepares in what he must know is his final hour on earth to do battle again, to once again, and from the beginning, set out to do battle against evil. He is armed only with the tiny crucifix, the little bottle of holy water, and the book of the Roman ritual. Those are his only weapons against evil made manifest. While he hates the demon, and while he fights the demon, he loves the little girl. He loves Reagan for the human being she is, and hates the demon for the suffering that the demon has caused her. It's in these final moments that Karras must look within himself to see if his faith has finally deserted him. And it's in Chris McNeil's question, is she going to die? That Karras finds the strength to continue the battle. And once again, you see him ascending. This time, in what is to be his final moments on this earth. Kinderman has returned to the house for what will be a final round of questioning, and obviously questions that he will have to put to Regan McNeil. When Karras returns to the room, he finds that Marin is dead. It's like the general has fallen in battle. All that's left is a foot soldier to carry on this massive war. These final moments of the exorcism can be interpreted in many ways. I'm not going to tell you what to think about these moments. You must find that meaning yourself. In my mind, there is a symbolism at work, of course. But Karras asks the demon to take him, to come into him, to leave the little girl. For an instant, the demon does. But from within, Karras finds the strength to drive the demon out, but plunges to his death in those seconds when he has brought the demon out of Regan and into himself. Everyone who sees The Exorcist takes from it what they bring to it. If you believe in the mystery of faith, in the power of goodness over evil, that is what you will take from the film. If you believe that the world is a terrible place where evil prevails, then that's what people have taken from the film. There is no question in my mind, or in the mind of William Peter Blatty, who created this story, that this is a story where goodness triumphs over evil.
You want to make the confession?
In his final moments, Father Dyer, Karras's best friend, asks Karras if he wants to confess his sins, and Karras, who has no voice left, is only able to inarticulately signal that he wishes to confess his sins so that he may enter into the kingdom of heaven. The struggle is over. Chris and Regan are going to leave Georgetown, go back to their old life. Sharon, who's Chris's assistant, will not go back with them. Her experience of this is something that she will take with her. For a long time, probably, she will live alone with it. But all of them have to get on with their lives. Sharon gives Chris the medal that she found in the bedroom that Chris had torn off Father Karras's neck. That's the St. Joseph medal, if you will recall, that Father Marin found in Iraq. It is a metaphor for something that came out of the earth in ancient Iraq onto the neck of a priest in present-day Georgetown and into the hands of the mother of the little girl who was possessed by the demon Pazuzu. Father Dyer comes back to the house to pay his last respects to Chris McNeil and to see if little Regan is all right, and Chris tells him that she doesn't remember any of it, which is what happens in these cases.
All done. Okay. Honey, this is Father Dyer.
Regan is restored to normal. restored to her pureness and innocence. But something reminds her of what happened, the priest's collar, and she inadvertently kisses this man on the cheek who she's just met, perhaps in memory of the man who saved her life.
Bye.
There's not a lot more to be said. Chris has the St. Joseph Medal, and she thinks that it rightfully belongs to Father Karras's best friend, Father Dyer. But in this edition, in this new edition that we've made to the film that's not in the original, Dyer gives her the medal back. He says, "Why don't you keep it?" And so, as a spirit of faith, as a message of faith, as a metaphor for faith, that medal is left with Chris and therefore Reagan. Dyer goes to the place where Father Karras plunged to his death a few hours before. He says a silent prayer. The memory of what happened is over his shoulder. And there's nothing left for it but to return to the Jesuit residence at Georgetown University. Lieutenant Kinderman comes to pay his respects to the house, but he finds that Chris and Reagan have left and that they're okay, and we see now that Kinderman is not going to press criminal charges, that Kinderman too understands that something has happened here beyond understanding,
Back to business.
something that has to do with an authority higher than the people involved in the crime that he's come to investigate. And in an attempt to keep alive the spirit of Father Karras, the spirit of faith, the spirit of the victory of goodness over evil, Kinderman and Dyer, in a scene that's been newly added to the film, talk about something that Kinderman and Karras had talked about, thus perpetuating the spirit of Karras. Because in all of them, in Chris and Reagan and Kinderman and Dyer, Karras is alive.